First of all, happy Republic Day to everyone who's watching, and thank you for joining us. This is a conversation we recorded a little earlier in the day. Republic Day is, of course, the day that our Constitution came into effect, the day we became a republic. And what our Constitution gives us is a beautiful list of fundamental rights, the very foundation on which we based and built this entire country. We're looking at the fundamental rights slightly differently today. We're looking at it from the perspective of one half of this country, women, to understand if we have in fact done justice to what our founding parents imagined us to be as a country that's truly equal, a country that treats men and women equally. Now, unlike other countries, when India got independence, women and men were given equal rights. In many other histories, women had to fight for the right to vote. They had to fight for the right to inherit property. But in our constitution, we viewed men and women equally. But has that really translated on the ground? And to help us understand that and to help us answer those questions, I have a very interesting guest joining me today. Nishtha Satyam joins us. Nishtha is the Deputy Country Representative of UN Women. She is, in fact, the youngest woman to represent UN Women among 193 countries. She's dedicated right now all of her work to gender equality and women's empowerment in India and has been doing this job for 3 years now. Nishtha joins us at this point to talk about, really compared to the rest of the world, how much progress we're making as a country in terms of fundamental rights for women, equality and empowerment for women, and how much the last 1 year of COVID and the lockdown perhaps set us back in that aspect. Nishtha, first of all, thank you for joining us and happy Republic Day to you.
Thank you, Faye. Thank you. Thank you. Happy Republic Day to you as well. And to, of course, everybody watching this, listening into this. Thank you for also calling me interesting. I think that's the first time I've been called interesting. I feel very profound today morning. But and thank you for that question on where we've moved and where we are, because I think that's an important question to ask each other. That's an important data point to remind each other of at this point in time. Now, if you look at the progress of gender rights in India, let's first understand the picture that is India, because to speak of India in a monolithic, homogeneous way would be completely being disloyal to the idea of India. And to further speak of women in a monolithic way, which is as one homogeneous group in one homogeneous country, is probably doing double the disservice. So essentially, I think when we speak about gender rights, it's important to understand that the deep-rooted cultural and social notions that India is embedded in, and particularly the history of gender rights is embedded in. So that makes us a country of many stories, of many realities. And from the perspective of gender, very, very paradoxical. Now, and I say this with some amount of pride and some amount of guilt. And let me tell you where the pride comes from. You know, we're one of those countries where we've had our moments long back. Like you said, you know, we've had our first female vice president, we've had our first female chief minister, first woman in the IAS, first woman in the stockbroking, way, way, way back than many of our peers, if I may use that word, in many other countries that today our super economic powers have had. We have the largest number of women in grassroots politics anywhere in the world. Now, honestly, that's a statistic that we should be wearing on our shoulder. We have the largest, we've, of course, over a period of time, been looking at increasing the number of women in the armed forces, in front lines, wherever it may be. We're also home to the largest number of women health workers. So, of course, women, their representation across the pipeline has been a matter of pride. It has also been a matter of guilt because we know that women are still missing from apex organizations, from places where decisions are being made, from boardrooms still largely. On the other hand, we do have still tragic issues like the lowest child sex ratio across the globe. We have, we still see women crumbling under the honor paradigm, under those conversations. We still see that women struggle to make it prime time. And prime time could be across any sphere really. So I think the journey between equal representation and equal participation and effective participation is a journey that we are yet to plug fully. But that said, no country in the world today, as per the Sustainable Development Goals and indicators that country themselves have picked up for themselves to report themselves as gender equal countries, no single country in the world today can claim to be a gender equal country. But that doesn't give us any consolation to be where we are.
So I just want to break that down, if I may, so our audience can understand that. So if we just focus on the healthcare services and the health services for women, how badly were we affected in the last 1 year based on research that you're looking at?
Well, quite, given that women represent also the constituency that accesses a lot of these services only through the provision of the state, is probably indicative of the fact that the closing down of some services or not having been considered essential was a breakdown point. But let me, before we get into that, paint a picture of what COVID has done and what has been the impact of the pandemic on women. Honestly, there are things that we all know. There are things that I think we've all gone through just as women. We've been a surge in unpaid care work with, migrants coming back. Most of them were men, with people being locked into the four walls. The amount of unpaid work on women, or the unpaid care work burden, has of course almost more than tripled. The other thing that we have seen is there has been a surge in domestic violence. We've seen that as women are locked up with no access to essential services that we spoke about, with a complete roll down on mobility, with no access to their mothers, their sisters, their support, their informal support groups per se, we have seen a surge in domestic violence as reported by the NCW. So we are looking at a large number of women who have gone off the radar, who have gone missing, either in terms of identity or work or income, or composite identity, which means that there is deprivation on every single front of their life, and all of those intersect.
There's, Nishtha, of course, the fundamental problem of migration, which is what India faced. The massive movement of workers who went back to their villages during the lockdown because they weren't able to sustain themselves in the cities, and the city sort of, for want of better terms, turned their backs on them. The women that accompanied those families, what is the impact? What's happening with those women now? What are the ground reports telling you about the impact that's had on women in our country?
Even today, even in urban homes, the amount of negotiation that a woman has to go through to just break through their barriers, travel to another city, find work that pays, find work that honors, and then suddenly to lose that power. Suddenly to lose that entire deal that they have negotiated and have put their lives behind. And I think it's going to take us intentional, sustained, and very long-term interventions to actually pick women back, because a lot of them are having to come back to the negotiation table in the first place.
When we talk about what our constitution sort of assures to women, right? And it's a really good day to have that conversation on Republic Day. The fundamental rights and our freedoms. Have we managed to deliver those fundamental rights and freedoms to women, or is it something that still remains on paper?
Well, honestly, it's a great day to talk about the Constitution, and just not talk about the Constitution for women, but the fact that the Constitution is the very foundation of how you and I identify ourselves. The truth is that any piece of legislation, any piece of law is far from its implementation, because we are also, through the Constitution, challenging the oldest living institution of the world, which is patriarchy. And we know that about 60 to 80% of all agricultural work is done by women. But today, when we're talking about women's rights, when we're talking about farmers' rights, are we imagining a woman? Do we see women? So I think that's exactly the gap between the provisions of the Constitution as fundamental rights and the access of the Constitution as a fundamental right.
The idea of generation equality, which is also an idea I'd like to explain to our audience as well, derived from the declaration made in Beijing in 1995, which, we're now closing in on 25 years of making that declaration. If you would just take us through, what that declaration was. And obviously, we haven't achieved it, but have we gotten closer? Have we made progress? Things can't be all that bad.
Well, true, things can't be all that bad. And I think it's a good day to start with that thought. You know, it's also important to understand why these documents, why the Constitution is important for us, because these are not just a mere set of words. These are a set of words that you and I can access and claim and fight for. As a right. And I think that's where it's important to understand that the Beijing Platform for Action really marked that historic blueprint, which guides the vision of the current Sustainable Development Goals. Now, what are the Sustainable Development Goals for those listening to us? It's a set of 17 goals that the world has come together. And I'm trying to attach that weight there, that the world has come together to agree to use as a vision, as a blueprint for where we will go from here. So it's that vision for collective action and wisdom. The one attitude that I get mostly from when we work on women's rights and gender equality, अरे मेम साहब ये तो होता रहेगा, ये तो वो तब की बातें हैं जब देश की गरीबी हट चुकी, you know, you've gone through all the problems and pretty much that moment in time when as a country you may have nothing to do, but तो ये तब की बातें हैं, तब देखी जाएगी. But the what generation equality does is to place front and center the issue of gender equality as a prerequisite to achieving anything else, which means that 50% इस देश की 50% जो population है, जो आवाम है, if you don't liberate them, if you don't empower them, if you don't treat them equally, there is absolutely no way we are going to be able to achieve anything else. And generation equality is that urgency, is that commitment, is that roadmap that is going to take us in definitive ways towards the 2030 agenda.
So, Dishna, you know, the changes will have to happen on different levels, right? So there's obviously government, state, center, city. There is corporate India. There is the public sector, you know, organizations. There are schools, there are colleges, there are hospitals, the midday meal program. You know, all of these various structures of establishment, our judiciary, our executive, our police force, our doctors, our nurses. How do we bring everyone on board to the plan you just talked about? Because at the end of the day, this is where the change has to happen, right? On these levels, in these organizations, in these rooms.
I agree. I think, and I think that's also a realization that has happened within the women's movement. Faye. It's not just a realization that has happened otherwise. Because if you see, if you'd speak to, you know, people who've been on that fight for a very long time, anybody would easily say, कि हमसे इस conversation में इस दौरान कुछ लोग रह गए. I think we left the men out in the conversation for a very, very long time to come. And today in 2014, it was a moment of realization for UN women, ki, Arey, how have we not spoken to the men? Particularly if we're looking at essentially what is the redistribution of power. And in only 2014, it occurred to us, and we had a campaign called, you know, the He for She, which is basically mobilizing one half of humanity in support of the other. So this, the understanding that this is going to take all of us, it will surprise you, is a very new understanding in any system. You know, for very, very long, we've had a set, a group of black suited men sit in a room and talk vehemently, passionately about the idea. But this time we're very clear. Nothing about women without women. The second realization is we cannot have this conversation in isolation. So while women remain at the center of this conversation, it is everybody's problem. And we have to get to a point where everybody agrees that it's their problem.
You know, data that CMI is putting out on employment shows that among the people who have lost jobs, and I'm talking about formal employment here, a large number of those were women. The women lost the jobs first. This means a dip in financial independence. So having your own money. This means a dip in access, and more importantly, the thing that we haven't talked about up till now, violence. You know, not being able to step out of the house, being in the house all day, and the spike that has been noticed across the country, in domestic violence, in abuse, and in a feeling of being trapped, really, especially if one loses one's job. But that means that woman has also lost her ability to walk away because she no longer has that financial sort of independence. And I know that there are state governments who have taken note and decided to do something about it. But if we step back and look at the larger picture as a country, how bad is it right now?
Well, it's reasonably bad because, we're not just talking about violence that leaves a physical mark, right? We are not just talking about financial independence. We're also talking about finding emotional dependence. And the one thing that I think all women, urban, rural, empowered, not empowered, literate, not literate, have understood is that much of our found liberty is also based on our ability to step out. Is to step out of home either for work or otherwise. And I think when that is curbed, when that is questioned, most of us have found ourselves in positions re-questioning or rethinking, what was the win that we thought we had made? Maybe nothing. And in for many women in their lives, this has showed up as domestic violence, as economic financial abuse, as emotional abuse with no place to step out. If you look at the at data, there's been a surge, almost a 70% surge from last year to this year March, and I'm talking about early parts of the lockdown, where women have filed cases under the right to live with dignity. So the conversation largely is yes about financial independence, it is about economic independence, but it is also about the right to live with dignity, which circles us back to the rights in the Constitution.
Gishtha, thank you for spending time with me answering these questions. And I look forward to having many more conversations as the journey progresses, because obviously this is not a one conversation thing, and it's also not a 1 year or a 1 day attempt. This is something that's going to happen. It's going to need to happen over the long term. It's going to need changes, like you pointed out, in various aspects of life, in mindset, some practical, some perhaps in just hard wiring of how we view women. And maybe through the process, each of us will figure out how each of us can be voices and influencers, and enjoying the attempt of making this a larger change. I think that for me the most important thing would be to get everybody to realize that women's rights are human rights. And so when women do better, society does better, the country's GDP does better, businesses thrive, everybody's more prosperous, everybody's happier, everybody is better adjusted, children are better off. And we should, the whole concept of not looking at this as this narrow, oh, this is a woman-centric thing, but this is a social thing that impacts all of us. So I wish you very, very good luck for these extremely difficult goals you have set for yourself. And I do hope that we can talk on a regular basis about how well it's going.
Well, absolutely. Thanks for taking time, and that too on Republic Day, to have this wonderful conversation, reminding us of the wonderful constitution that we have, of that hope that we have in the Constitution. So I'm really glad. I think you're right. It will take us a series of conversations to be able to dive deeper, dive beyond statistics, really get into real life stories about what exists and what can be the change. Like they always say, the only question is who gets to paint the picture. And I'm glad that, these conversations will help us in widening the scope of who gets to paint the picture. And I'm very, very happy to be talking to you. And I realize that, yes, sometimes, we think about how difficult could it be for others to understand that this is a good for all solution. But the truth is, challenging patriarchy is unpleasant. Those who hold power are challenged by it. The redistribution of power has been a pleasant process. So it's going to be a combination of looking at the long term and going through the short term, no matter how challenged we feel. And I'm glad that we're together in this journey. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.